Dear friends, delighted to have all of you here in this wonderful webinar on executive coaching, a perquisite or a business imperative. The whole intent is to see how executive coaching and efficacious leadership development tool can reach a larger base in the industry at a time when industry needs it the most. To help us really unravel this whole story, we have a very, very eminent panel. We have with us Prakash Iyer. Prakash, hi, welcome. Thanks for agreeing to moderate this webinar for us. Prakash is a leadership coach, leadership trainer, prolific author, motivational speaker, and proud that you're an alumnus of CFI, a CFI coach.
I was hoping you'd say, dear friend Ganesh.
Prakash was the former CEO of Kimberly-Clark Unilever. Thanks, Prakash. We have Vir Advani, who is the Managing Director of Blue Star, leaders in air conditioning in the country. Blue Star, as you know, has been in India for over now 77 years. Vir leads the organization in India. He's a graduate of UPenn. Vir, thanks for taking the time and agreeing to be here and sharing your experiences about coaching and various facets of being a coachee and a sponsor of coaching. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We have B R Suresh. B R Suresh is the country human resources head of Bosch India. Bosch, I'm told, has going to complete 100 years of their presence in India. And the manufacturing facility itself is going to turn about 70 next year. Suresh has been a business leader turned HR leader, has a very interesting dimension. He's been a coach, he's been a coach, he's been a sponsor, champion of a coaching culture in the organization, has a lot of fascinating dimensions to share. So with that fascinating panel, Prakash, over to you.
Okay, hello everybody, and delighted that you've taken the time to be over here for this webinar. I can see there are about 133 participants now. That's a pretty good number. That's, you know, as they say, almost 97 more than what India scored in, you know, entire test innings. And thanks, Ganesh, for those generous introductions. But what you haven't heard, of course, is an introduction of that man himself, Ganesh Chella. You know, in many senses now the father of coaching in India in many ways, and a super coach himself. So thanks, and thanks Vir and Suresh for joining us today. And I just thought what we'll try and do today is to unravel a little bit about, you know, what coaching really is and take the mystery out. This has been a tough year. You know, if you look back over the last 10 months, it's been tough for most of us. But I'd like to start by saying, let's think of those last few weeks where we've all had gifts and sweets being exchanged. And, you know, it is the season for gifting. And I feel that coaching is like that little gift box we get sometimes, which just refuses to open. You know, it's got that, you know, there's something nice inside. You think there are some goodies, and as you try and unwrap it, it just doesn't seem to open, right? I'm sure you can relate to that. And I think a bit of it, maybe that's what coaching is all about. So what I'm hoping we'll do today is to try and open that up and say, hey, what's inside? Okay, and to understand what's inside, we've got a super coach in Ganesh, we've got a CEO in Vir, and we've got someone who's, you know, a head of HR, but also a coach, a champion of coaches in Suresh. And hey, we're looking forward to this. So I'm going to get started without much ado, but one quick word maybe to all of you who are listening in. Fire away your questions. If you've got a question that comes to your mind, just put that in the Q&A and we will try and pick it up and answer it as we go along. And all I'm looking for right now is 139 questions coming in to say, what's on top of your mind right now as we get started? So Vir, I want to start with you, Vir, as a CEO who was, you know, one of those early CEOs who had a coach, right? I'm guessing this must have been a unique experience. And, you know, talk us through some of those memories. Here you are, you think you arrived, you're the super successful coach and a super successful CEO, and now you get a coach. What was it like?
Yeah.
What was the trigger? Share some of your memories.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so my introduction to coaching was particularly interesting. My lead independent director at the time, so this was about 7-8 years ago, my lead independent director at the time called me up one day and he said that we've just completed a P60 and things have gone well, but there are two issues that have come up, and you have two problems that you need to fix. And the first one is delegation, and the second one is that you are too task-oriented a leader, and you need to build up your EQ. And he told me that the answer is coaching, and so it's a problem-solving tool, is how he put it to me. And before I knew it, I had a coach. So that's really how it happened. He also told me that at the end of the coaching assignment, there's going to be a report card, and the coach is going to report back to the group of independent directors. So it was like being back in school, And so I kind of tentatively got into it, but I was most fortunate to have a wonderful person as a coach. It turns out, Suresh, I share a coach with you, R R Nair. And so RR was my coach, and we got into it. We had in fact, I worked with him even after the first 7-month engagement. We continued the engagement for much longer. And I got a lot out of it. It didn't end up being a report card and all of that. It actually changed my management style. It changed the way I approached, even business. And most importantly, it gave me a trusted partner in my journey, as it was. So that was about 7-8 years ago. So that's how I got introduced to it.
Sure. And I'm very curious, there are CEOs in the, that I've kind of known in the past who almost hid the fact that they had a coach from the rest of their teams or the organization, versus other CEOs who kind of flaunted the coach or were quite happy to say, hey, I'm working with RR or whoever else it might have been. So what was it like for you?
Yeah, so mine was the first coaching assignment in the company. So everyone was looking at it, quite curiously. This older gentleman would show up in our office, and he'd sit in a boardroom, and Vir would sort of enter there and not emerge for 6 hours, at a time. So it was, but I made it very public. I made it open. I told everyone that this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it for these reasons. And I asked everyone to give me constant feedback, at least on these two aspects, that I'd been given feedback on. And of course, we added many things after that. So our approach in Blue Star has always been to keep it as open as possible.
Super. And I'm guessing that's how it works best. On to you, Suresh. As someone who's been both the beneficiary of a coach, has been a coach himself, and is, like Ganesh said, driving a culture of coaching in Bosch now. If you were to pick out 2 or 3 highlights of this journey around coaching, what comes to your mind?
I would say we just started, and I would give a lot of credit somewhere in 2009 when my predecessor as CHRO, who also came from business, Krishna, just partnered with me and said, a couple of your guys, can you encourage them to take coaching? They were very strong guys, manufacturing guys. I was head of the plant. And at that time, coaching had a kind of a stigma. So my role earlier when we started was to position it in a positive light. Not necessarily as a perquisite, but something which will aid you. And by doing it, you are actually gaining some stars rather than having some tarred feathers. That was the start of the journey. Of course, for me also the biggest personal as well as organizational boost came from and I had the shared coach in almost a similar time frame, 2012, where this gentleman who was earlier in Unilever and also is quite a well-known coach, has in the meanwhile become a kind of a guru for life without any payment further after the coaching assignment. And that convinced me on the potential of coaching. So the first is, as a sponsor, I did see the benefits and the acceptance by my own colleagues in the team. Second, when I became a coachee, it showed me the power of coaching. And I also did it pretty openly because I really had a cause of showing I was seen to be successful, not necessarily to say I'm good, but somebody, and then I started using the narrative of many successful people using coaching as a platform. So with my earlier colleague, we really publicized these things in casual conversation. So coaching got accepted. So that was the first step, and people started asking for can I also have coaching? So that was one turning point. Coaching as a burden or coaching as something wrong turned in around 3-4 years to coaching. If I get it, then it's kind of something positive. The organization is interested in me. Now, coaching as a leadership instrument of leadership, building leadership style. This is just very new. It's around 2.5 years old, where we also learned from some other organizations. For us, it was Larsen and Toubro, who had been engaging with CFI as a partner, for example. And we just took the easy way, copied with pride. We had someone who made that connect for us. And with that, for me, that has been the biggest change. And some things were very unexpected. Number one, the book has created among the senior leadership. If I look at the top 100 leadership, initially it was selling to come on board. Now we're running the third batch in 2 years' time. So almost all the vice presidents, which is the first level below the directors, are asking to come on board. Sometimes it's just the time constraint which prevent them. And the other part is the gradual recognition of roughly around 100 coaches from these coach interns who initially concerned about engaging with leaders and what will they know about me, is also turning where they're saying that, can I have a coach? So I'd say we are still somewhere on 1/3 of the way towards the possibilities which exist with coaching, both for developing leaders from the part of hierarchical leadership and changing the style. And the other part is actually bringing in the benefit of coaching and mentoring to a large number of budding talent where the scope is huge and the resource is still not enough. And this we continue to supplement with external experienced coaches like you, Prakash or Iyer, wherever we have cases where we feel we really need that experience. So it's a healthy mix of internal and external.
Sure. And Vijay Kumar Rajgopal has a question for you, Suresh, which is to say, can you share some examples of how you kind of framed coaching as a positive intervention rather than as a remedial or a corrective kind of initiative?
I mean, initially the people choose, around 80 people of them seemed to be successful people. So the first one was choosing people already successful and just giving them a coach for those 1 or 2 dimensions which are kind of being a preventive thing for them to make it to whatever is that next step. It need not always be an elevation in terms of promotion, but in terms of being more successful, or somebody is extremely task-oriented, great in results, celebrated for the results they achieve. But people work with a bit of fear from them. So how do you help the people find a better balance? So when we did these kind of things and we carefully chose with my earlier predecessor, it was very clear that successful people are more successful with coaching. The second part I would say was populating this in a very formal manner in various conversations. And I must say, we really had the privilege of the then MD and the current MD and many of the senior people following suit. And being a manufacturing organization, hierarchy can be used as a positive lever too. So when hierarchy speaks very positively after it's convinced about something, they tend to accept it as gospel. And then you see more of them all over the place. And you start engaging with them and believing that it can really work. But I must say, I'm not saying we are there, but the journey has been extremely positive and an evolutionary one. We need to pick up speed and do more of it.
Sure. Hierarchy does have its advantages, clearly. Ganesh, moving to you, Ganesh, as someone who's seen coaching across organizations, I'm sure a lot of us are keen to understand what is the starting point of this journey? How does a coaching engagement actually get initiated? How do you decide whether a problem is coaching the solution, or, how do they actually figure all of this out? Tell us.
Yeah. I must admit that quite often the starting is modest, tentative, and often to address a problem, so to speak. So someone has identified that this is a successful executive doing very well on many counts, but has some problems or challenges, so to speak. and they have identified in their mind what the problem is, and now they're looking for a coach. So it's somewhat urgent, it's somewhat immediate, and there is a little bit of a burning platform. It has perhaps reached the levels of the executive management, sometimes the board, and they say, can we find a coach quickly? Somebody knows a coach or whatever. It starts in that manner. And there is nothing right or wrong. That's part of the evolution. Very rarely will an organization come with a complete blueprint and say, this is how we figured out what coaching will do. But soon, organizations with mature HR processes will quickly shift gears and say, what are some of the needs for which we can make good use of coaching? And they will quickly migrate to the second stage of evolution, which is to say, using coaching to address a business need. And a good example of that is transition. As we promote people and give them bigger jobs, can we ensure we set them up for success by also giving them a coach? So that's how I think coaching evolves from a problem-solving kind of tool to addressing a business need, or transformational changes are happening. Can we support some of our key executives with coaching? Is the second natural evolution that happens.
Sure.
That's how I would say it.
And is there a situation where, let's say, they look at coaching as a solution where you would recommend that, hang on, coaching may not be the answer for your problems? What would that situation be?
Yeah, sometimes there might be, for example, deep-seated interpersonal issues among people. Typically, startups have come to us where three bunch of college classmates or hostel mates have come together, started a successful company, and suddenly they don't see eye to eye with one another. And they say, we now need a coach. Now, that might actually be a case for third-party peacemaking rather than a coach coming in and trying to sit there and sort it out. Sometimes there might be large-scale change required within the organization, and the CEO might believe that coaching is a more gentle way of bringing about large-scale change, whereas other things may be required for the CEO to drive his or her agenda in the organization. So if one person is trying to use coaching as a vehicle to drive his or her agenda, it can become very onerous on the coaches. And the people might say, but what's in it for me? It seems to be someone else's agenda. These are two big things where coaching can run into some rough weather.
Sure. That's interesting. I remember when we were talking earlier, you did mention how after your experience with a coach, and I think there was another managing director who also had a coach, you started to roll this out to other leaders in Blue Star. And I'd be very keen to hear what was the experience thereafter as you try to cascade this from the top to perhaps other leaders in the organization.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so we continued with the mistake that we started with, which was there's a problem, we need to fix it. So we identified some people one level below us. And I think we identified individuals and we said, these are the problems, the specific issues that you need to fix. And coaching is a solution to that. And then we went about appointed coaches, and went through this process. And that, I would say, we came close to complete failure because it became a situation where it was, we were using coaching as a problem fixing tool, and therefore anyone who was getting coached in the organization had a problem, and therefore it came with a stigma, and that we lost our way for about I think it was close to a year plus, and we realized that
You've frozen.
Yeah, I think you must have connectivity issues.
It's just
reconnecting.
You're back. Sorry. You're back.
Sorry. So we lost our way. We then pulled it back, and we dropped this idea of it being a problem fixing tool, and instead we integrated it into our larger developmental plans that we run, and we mixed it up. We what Suresh mentioned is we chose some of the higher performing leaders and started to shed some of that stigma that was associated with it. And then we said we'll just do 3 or 4 successful engagements. We'll deliver them and let the organization see the benefit. And by the organization, it's the peers and it's the subordinates of these 4 managers. And that had a tremendous impact because we had literally 3.5 out of 4 were successful engagements, noticeable difference in behavior and in manner and style. And then we have rolled it out 1 level below. So now we're running coaching 3 levels below my level. So it's down to even below vice president. So I think that was our initial. So it took us 1 year of my time, another year of losing our way. So it took us about 2.5 years to get this model right. And we're now doing very well. So
super. So clearly, from your perspective, it's not the senior leadership perk. If you've rolled it down to 3 levels below that, and it seems to be working with noticeable behavior changes. How's it been for Bosch and Suresh? Keen to hear. Is coaching something that you're seeing working for younger managers? Or is this typically, now that you're CEO or now that you're putting your hand up to become CEO, I think we need a coach. How does it work?
Yeah. I mean, the good news is there is more demand than supply right now in terms of number of budding talent wanting to be coached. And we have not been able to solve the need, either through internal or external coaches. So we're trying to take, since we are, whether we like it or not, we live processes. Sometimes it can be good and bad. So we have a process of talent pools where we identify people who seem to demonstrate the potential to go to the next level, whatever the next level would be. And normally it's a 2 to 3 year process where there are multiple interventions. So this is the catchment where we largely tie up coaches and coachees. Apart from that, if somebody wants to, they can also opt for it. So right now, I'd say it's up to N-3 is where we have really used it, MT being the N-3. Having said this, it's had a kind of a reverse cascading effect too, where my colleague Soumitra Bhattacharyya, who's the CEO, has also opted RR twice as a partner, where at Apple, having someone as an independent sounding board really has been seen as beneficial. And right now, my colleague, the CFO, has opted for the advanced course. So he's with Ganesh as a trainee. So somewhere, without me, I can't claim credit as HR. Somewhere it has crossed a certain tipping point where the ripples are beginning to spread. And sometimes it goes downwards and creates a momentum among younger talent. And sometimes it also goes upwards where, honestly, it may sound a bit spiritual, but many people perhaps post for 50, and I'm also one of them, seem to be really connecting to their inner feeling of wanting to give something in an environment where they have the strength and capability to give. Everybody doesn't go to the slum. So I'll stop at that, but basically I'd say, Prakash, it's having a ripple effect. Early days in terms of having it as a culture across the organization, but moving into a process and going in the direction of being a culture is where I would place it.
That's interesting. And I know it's probably the second or third time, Suresh, you're referring to its early days and, we've got started on the journey. So I'm very keen to hear from you. What would be a couple of things that would need to happen, let's say over the next 6 months, that could help this journey to gain momentum and for it to start becoming a movement? What would be a couple of things?
Yeah, it's a bit spontaneous, not thought out. So I'm not sure. Please supplement with if you find some more things. So we currently have around 50 coaches, and we have gone hierarchically, largely ones, vice president, senior vice president, 1 level below. Largely N-1, some N-2 kind of a category for bringing in this movement to train them as coaches. Apart from those, and the same subset also have the benefit of external coaches, where external coaches involves a certain amount of financial outflow, while money is not the only criteria. We'd like to encourage both. So I've been talking and looking at a critical mass of around 100 internal coaches. supplemented by an ecosystem of around 15 to 20 external coaches, where and these 100 leaders as coaches actually behaving every day, not just in a coaching session, but every day coming across as leader, as a coach, then I'd say we are in the direction of having arrived. Because the ultimate goal is coaching as an intervention is a means to changing the style of leadership at different levels to be able to exhibit that day in and day out. And that's still something which is on a starting phase. If we get there, Prakash, we'll have a celebratory round.
Sure, leader as a coach, and I'm sure given that you have something like an ecosystem of coaches and 20 or 30 external coaches, expect a rush of LinkedIn requests next, Suresh, after this call, after this webinar.
They'll probably have to find a business case for that too. Right?
No, they'll all help you. They'll all help you with that. Ganesh, I want to turn to something that Vir talked about, which is this idea that earlier they made the mistake of thinking of coaching as, solving a problem or trying to fix something which is not working, right? Isn't that how a lot of coaching even today is? And I want to refer to a question that Krishnan has asked, where he says that in organizations, you have this rock star performer, high profile, who's getting great numbers, delivering results, but has huge behavior issues which everybody neglects. And then suddenly they say, now let's make him, senior manager, leader, CEO, and give him a coach so that we can fix this behavior challenge that he has. Ganesh, what's your sense? Is this still something typical of what a coaching engagement looks like?
So I must say that a lot of the Western coaching model is strongly what we call behavioral coaching. It started as behavioral coaching, is coach the strong alpha male. Some people use a very uncharitable term called coaching the brilliant jerk, so to speak. So it's been used not to be corrective in nature. But if you see India's evolution, on the other hand, a lot of our effort has been to help leaders suddenly deal with jobs which are very huge. Suddenly someone is handling 10,000 employees, couple of $1 billion of revenue and huge plant sizes. So scale complexity became very large in the last couple of decades. And it was more about enhancing their capability to grapple with the scale and size and complexity. Therefore, truly it was set in a more developmental tone. And a lot of Indians are being trained to be more assertive rather than toned down, on the other hand. Being assertive, having presence, speaking up for oneself, having the stature to claim one's space, going beyond functional expertise, displaying great management. So it's a very whole set of positive competencies are being looked forward to, rather than saying, fix this problem and fix that issue. So I think the whole groundswell is positive in India. It was set in a country that was growing rapidly, and coaching was seen as aiding these leaders to suddenly grapple with that. So I think that was a great starting point for where coaching got embedded. And I think that has helped us a lot. The first thing. The second is, the Western model was taking therapy and shredding a few things and building a coaching model. Whereas many of us haven't been to a therapist, our generation or one generation below. So for us, the only one we know are informal mentors. So we evolved from a more mentor plus model. We want someone who's like a mentor, older than us, but in a formal relationship. So I think we have the makings of a very unique model in India, and that's what gives me a lot of hope.
Ganesh, I've been thinking that if I look at something like the shampoo market in India, it got a huge fillip with the introduction of a shampoo sachet. So you suddenly found that people thought shampoo was good for their hair, but nobody really wanted to commit to buying this big bottle and spending large sums of money. And suddenly a company comes in and says, for a rupee, you can buy a sachet and discover what a shampoo can do for you. I'm just wondering, is there a sachet in coaching which perhaps companies can try and discover what coaching can do for them, rather than saying, now I need to put my CEO on the line and sign up and make sure that he's like committed for the next 6-10 months or whatever it is. Is there a model that can work?
Yeah, your long years in FMCG is showing up. No, but I'm happy to ask that question. We discovered that the traditional whole 9 yards coaching model of, 9 sessions, 1 year, 3 multiple engagements and 360s and so on, needs to give way to a more agile, flexible model. I think clearly there is a need for that. Okay. So what we see today is that we have come up with a coaching model where, how do we find a way to introduce coaching people who are far younger? Typically, people who get executive coaching in their late 40s, the average age, late 40s, they have about 10 years ahead of them. And many of them have reservations of how much change should I undergo when I'm actually very successful otherwise. We are therefore saying, catch them younger, catch them when they are in the 30s and give them a taste of coaching. So we come up with a model where, let's say, a coach has 3 sessions with someone, has a conversation, puts them through some assessment, debriefs, gives them a development plan and shows them a way which they can then walk by themselves. So you're absolutely right. It is time for the coaching fraternity, the industry, the practice to reinvent itself and give youngsters who have a 25, 30-year runway ahead to start tasting coaching when it is still not a problem.
Sure. Vir, you've seen coaching in your organization for what, 8, 9 years now. And I'm keen to hear from you. What are some of the things that enable success when it comes to coaching? And what are some of the watch outs or red flags which can tell you that things can go wrong here when it comes to that coaching actually being effective?
Sure. So, one thing, what we've seen, having evaluated the number of engagements we've done, I think the most important thing is that the coachee needs to want to change or want to make a change of some kind or transformation. It's a little bit like hypnosis. You can't hypnotize someone unless and make them do something that they would not do if they were awake. So I think that is the opening. That's the most important thing. So you have to have that conversation with the coachee from a sponsor to a coachee, and the sponsor's responsibility is to ensure that the coachee is in fact ready to receive this kind of intervention. I think that's one important thing. The other thing we learned in Blue Star, maybe unique to us, I don't know, is that we were not spending enough time in matching coachees and coaches in the sense that finding that fit or that equation, because this is a very personal, intense engagement that lasts for multiple months. It is one-on-one. So, there's something to be said about fit and equation and body language and comfort. So I think we didn't spend enough time on that in the initial days. We now, Ganesh knows because we exclusively use Ganesh's organization, CFI. I'll ask him for 3, 4, 5 coaches who I will personally speak to before I even introduce someone to the coachee, because I know the coachee. If I'm the sponsor, for example, so I do that vetting as a sponsor. I figure out who's the right fit, and only then I introduce. So I think that's another thing that we have learned that works. The third thing is that we talked about it. You said shampoo, sachet, but I think there's something to be said of that. I think expectations also need to be set correctly with the coachee, that you're not going to see results in 1 month and 2 months and overnight, that you do need to see this journey through, and there will be an outcome benefit at the end. So I think that expectation setting is also something that's important. So these are some of the things that we've learned. Where it hasn't worked or why it hasn't worked, I think I've already mentioned. We picked. Sorry, there's one important one. We went down the path of saying that we should have the coach and the coachee from the same function. So HR person should have an HR coach, and a sales person should have a sales background coach. That kind of thing. We actually found that that's not necessary, and in fact, in some cases, it backfired. Sometimes professional egos come the way. And instead of working on what is the priority for the coaching assignment, they sort of digressed into their functional expertise. So I think maybe that's another thing, is to see how you match these personalities and their backgrounds. So that's how I experience.
And that also answers the question that Raj has asked, where he says, like, a team has a batting coach and a fielding coach. Is it time to have functional specialists like a CMO coach and a CHRO coach and a CIO coach? But I think that's a useful answer. A quick one, Vir.
Ganesh is shaking his head because he knows we've had these conversations in the early days where I was pushing for, CMO and CMO and how many years of sales has he had and how many people has he managed, and Ganesh would tell me it doesn't matter, and I'd be scratching my head and saying, so that's really how it is.
Yeah. Suresh, I just want to ask a question that's come up from 2 or 3 people, including Pradeep Shroff, as I can see right now, which is, A, how do you decide whether to engage an internal coach or to use an internal coach? And second, can you share some insights on what are you looking for in a coach when you meet him? How do you decide whether this is the person you'd like to hire as a coach?
Yeah. So this is still an evolving journey, Prakash. But since I mentioned that the internal coaches that we've been building, or I would use the classical term of coach intern, unless we do at least 5 coaching assignments. I've completed 3 formally. I wouldn't still a coach, and there are people who've done 10, 20, etc. So right now, the internal coaches are largely for, let's say, somewhat relatively easier cases as judged by 2 or 3 of us, who have the capability of very quickly assessing the coach and the coachee. If it gets into a certain higher level of complexity, and I had a own case where my first coachee, extremely brilliant technology wise and high into IT, but somewhere I sensed that if I go further as a CHRO, it's uncomfortable for both of us to get into that holy space, which really needs, one, a trained psychologist. I'm not one. I come from operations, and just doing a CFI course won't help. And second, someone who has had the experience of dealing with trust, of getting into very personal issues, which might be deeply personal, happen something largely in the. So those were cases where so in summary, let me put it 2 ways. One, while it might sound a bit chauvinistic or hierarchical, wherever it's 2 to 3 levels difference, then we say young ones, you can't do much harm. They're very open. Easier cases, so go ahead with internal coaches. One is more from age and experience of the coachee point of view. The second one is more from the point of view of what's the assessment of what needs to change for the coachee and what could be the degree of difficulty for the change. That would be the deciding. And of course, a lot of conversations, which I earlier had some colleagues who were doing it wonderfully, and now I've been a bit into that role. So yesterday night I had a half an hour call with Ganesh on 2 or 3 coaches. So mix of both. Not yet discovered a formula. When we do, I'll probably write a blog paper on it.
And before you wrote the blog, if I gave you a little post-it and I asked you to write down 3 things you'd look for in a coach, if you were trying to hire a coach for a senior leader, what would that be?
I'd probably give it a generic answer before a specific answer.
I wanted a specific one from you on this. Imagine you've got this senior vice president of manufacturing in Bosch, and he's looking for a coach because you've identified that, hey, a coach can help him to perhaps, aim for the top job in Bosch elsewhere or become, head of business here or whatever. What would you look for as a coach?
I mean, the honest answer, the way it's working today is thanks to somebody like CFI and Ganesh. I just spell out the requirement to him and then give him a call and explain a bit more, some things which can't be written down sometimes. And he proposed 2 or 3, look at the profiles, and then in most cases it works. But if I were to really, because I really haven't got into assessing each individual coach. Because until now, this system has largely worked. But hypothetically, if we were to actually do it, then I would look at the coachee, whom I would know relatively well, the need for the coaching, and with that as a background, I'm sorry to say this, largely rely on gut feel in terms of what is the kind of match. So if you would boil it down to actually one or two characters, one I'd say, what is the kind of match for the specific thing that we are looking for the coaching to start with, and something else. Second one is a gut feel on how does the person come across, and do I feel that the person can be a match in terms of alliance for the coachee whom I always know better.
Sure. And if I might just stay with that for a minute, would there be a disqualifier in your selection process, which is to say that, you see something, say, no, that's not going to work for me? What would that be?
I have not had that, but I'd say I've come across some people who have offered to be or were referred to be by one of my senior colleagues, where whenever, personally for me, if I see the ego coming across, irrespective of what the content might be, it's a bit of a switch off for me. When the I comes across very dominantly, then I have a question mark whether the person will basically be able to serve or really help without getting into more a mentoring mode rather than a coaching mode. So how the person comes across and ego would be one dominant factor. The second one I would still say is more from whatever is the perception of the fit for a specific assignment, with due respect to the coach who might be good under other circumstances.
Sure.
Prakash, you're putting me on the mat because I've really, while I come from operations, I've never really thought it up in terms of specific criteria. After this, I'll do my homework and really list down and come up with a set of criteria which can make the whole process probably automated.
No, Suresh, I think it's been useful. It's been useful. And thank you so much for kind of answering those questions. Loads of questions in the chat box I can see. And I'm going to try and rapidly go through as many of those as I can. And Ganesh, I want to start with you. Jason has a question. And he says, where do you see coaching training in India evolving? And he says, makes a comment that there will be many people who call themselves coaches, but don't actually coach. It's an unregulated market. Quick comment?
So we are a coach training institution. So I want to answer that question carefully without hurting anyone. I'd like to differentiate between credentializing and competence building, right? The first thing for a person who wants to become a coach is to say, do I want credentials, a certificate, or do I want to build competence? Credentializing can happen in 3 to 4 days. I can undergo something and get a certificate. But for a corporate executive to metamorphosize into becoming a coach is a long journey. There are various things that people have to change. The most important thing is to be an executive, I need to be quite directive, tell people what to do, push hard for results and so on. And being a coach is to get results by encouraging people to find their own answers. This is a big shift and a lot of unlearning. So our program is a 1-year-long journey because people have to go inward, discover themselves, see how they can bring the best of themselves to bear on the other person without their ego coming in the way. Therefore, when people focus on competence building, they make the right choice of whom do I work with to become a coach. The credentializing market is, as you said, quite commoditized, huge, large numbers of people offering these. And therefore, unfortunately, there are a large number of people with a certificate who haven't managed to do a day of coaching. So I would like people to first ask, why do I want to become a coach? If someone says, I want to quit my job and become a coach, I'll say, sorry, coaching is not a lucrative profession. It's a fulfilling profession. We must be clear about our goals. You cannot become a coach overnight and start earning money. It takes a long amount of time. And coaching, in my opinion, we have over 200 coaches, works best with people who have sorted themselves out financially, reputation and everything else. They have really nothing big to ask for. They have no deep cravings. they are the ones, in our opinion, have made some fantastic coaches. I'm sure some of them are on this call. This is a slightly slanted view, but this is where I come from.
Sure, but there's another interesting question. I can't remember who asked it about, maybe Generation Z or millennials as coaches. Why is it that it has to be this, gray hair, been there, done that, evolved in your language, sorted financially perhaps, who now wants to coach, versus perhaps a young 30-year-old who can probably teach a thing or two to some of these older folks?
So, in fact, when one e-commerce company came to us, the first thing they said, hey, listen, don't give us grandpa coaches.
Damn, I just became a grandfather.
So therefore, we have begun to admit people who are in their 30s, right, who bring a fresh perspective, but who have the values and ingredients of being truly coaching oriented, and some of them have begun to be pretty successful. So I agree with you that going forward, we need to bring the average age of our coaches down without compromising on the values that they uphold of the larger contribution they want to make to others, to give to others generously.
Sure. Deepak Thombre wants to know, does it help to have a coach who comes from the same industry? Do you look for that when you look for a coach?
I think, well, ours is a small industry, so we don't usually have a choice. But frankly, I've found no relevance or no importance to that. Like I said, functional competence, in fact, should not be there, or functional relevance should not be there. And industry knowledge also, I don't think is there. The one thing I do want to add to that, though, at least in my personal case and in several successful cases in Blue Star, the coach, while they may not have understood the industry or may not be from the same function, I think the conversations are very much about business and about our industry and about our competition and about our market, etc. So, of course, the coach needs to take some initiative to sort of come up to speed, as it were, with what your industry is about. But that outside perspective actually, helps. But certainly the coach should make that investment in time to learn, what they can about the coachee's sort of industry. That's how I put it.
Sure.
I would also endorse that, fully agree with Vir. 8 out of 10 cases, I would rather choose someone who's not from the same function. Or if it's a specific coaching assignment for functional scaling up, call it as such and match that. For some other competence that we've been talking about, rather go with someone who's not from the same function or even from the same domain.
To just add to that, what we did in one case, Ganesh helped me do, is actually for one of our function heads, we wanted to mix executive coaching and business coaching. It was a very unique requirement we had. And in that case, we identified a coach who was senior to that individual from that industry, from that background, from that function. But even when we did that, we broke the engagement into almost two, as it were. There were two parallel tracks running. And that gentleman and Ganesh's team did a fantastic job of not letting it sort of become a khichdi. But that was a unique sort of case. Otherwise, we like to keep it all separate. Yeah.
Great one. A question that's come up a couple of times, Ganesh, difference between coaching and mentoring, are they the same? Is coaching and leadership development the same thing? Quick answer.
Coaching is an integral part of leadership development. So the umbrella is leadership development, coaching is part of that. Mentoring and coaching are really brothers and sisters. For a long time, coaches tended to undervalue mentoring, which is not right. However, the essential difference is mentoring is naturally occurring, which means people choose a mentor. You don't appoint a mentor. The whole failure of mentoring programs is when mentors are appointed. And you try to formalize something which is naturally occurring. That is the cause of failure. So if you want someone to develop competence, call it coaching. Don't try to formalize mentoring and force it upon people and say, you must meet your mentor 4 times in a quarter and report to me what happens, and the mentor has to keep track. It is destined to fail. Having said that, quite often our coaches ask for a subject matter mentor or a specific mentor to be assigned from within the organization to work in tandem with the coach for certain specific needs. Then it works very well.
Sure. I know we talked about no need to match functions and industry, but there's a question that's been asked, which is, does it help to have women executives with women coaches?
Okay. This is an important question because CFI has begun to run some very specific programs for women in leadership. And there are times when women seek coaching because the context is gender. When the context is gender and they are grappling with biases, prejudices that are holding them back from staying in the game and sustaining their leadership journey within organizations, then they might consider necessary for another woman who has a first-hand experiences of biases, prejudices, and the impact of gender so that they can work through those issues. It is not that the leadership journeys are different from the contents and the competencies are the same, but the journeys are much tougher for women. And therefore it helps for a woman to be able to work with this. But the other way is absolutely not necessary. Many of our successful coaches are women, and when they work with men, and men may not, obviously don't have gender issues, which women quite often have. And therefore, that is why quite often we ask the organization, we ask for the context, and then try and match a woman to work with a woman leader. When gender is the context.
Sure. Maybe a flip side to this for Suresh. Suresh, have you had experience of a woman coach working with a male coachee? And how has that been?
I have currently a women coachee, and I've also helped at least, I remember, 4 women in the last 2 years find male coaches. It just happened. Honestly, I must, now that we bring up this point, I need to look for more women coaches to be brought in for male colleagues, which I have not really focused on. That may have a different effect. So it's brought something as a point to ponder and perhaps explicitly try out.
Clearly, Suresh is looking for more email coming into his inbox. Vir, question from Vaishnavi. What are the measurement criteria to assess the impact of coaching? So how have you figured whether it's worked or not worked?
Yeah, so the only real sort of real measure that we have had is doing the 360 at the beginning of the engagement and then at the end. That provides one perspective. But I find with coaching, just like with several other developmental interventions, I think it is more about what the peer group and the subordinate group sort of receives or feels in terms of the change. So what is the perception and what is the reality of that change? And that I find as a sponsor, wherever I'm a sponsor, I make the effort of proactively reaching out to, because it's an open process in Blue Star. So I reach out to the peers and I reach out to the subordinates and seek that feedback purely on progress or change from earlier, and it's more informal feedback and I get a feel and a pulse. So I'd like to highlight this, that the role of the sponsor is actually very, very critical in this process. So first of all, it's always helpful if the sponsor themselves has been through coaching, because then there's, they understand what it's about. Even if they have not, it's a very important role to keep the engagement on track and to seek this feedback, because that 360 report, it has numbers in it, and many of us feel very good that we filed a report, beginning it was 3.5, at the end it was 4 out of 5, great success, win, all of that. But it's that it's the real pulse and feel that you don't get out of that report, because you know how it is in organizations with peer and subordinate 360 degrees, they get skewed. So I think it's a sponsor's responsibility to sort of track that and report back to the management and then report back to the partner and the coaches, because I think that's one thing that I've seen. The good coaches will get that feedback from you, not through that 360, but through a number of those interactions. So that's what has been our experience.
Yeah. Sure. And maybe just another question again for you, Vir, which is, questions come up, which is more relevant when you try to choose a coach: business experience, past business experience, or past coaching experience?
Yeah, so we have that's I was thinking through that actually while Suresh was talking. He mentioned that issue of ego, and when he's shortlisting, I find that I maybe it's not appropriate, but I find that coaches with too much business experience, who have finished a career that has been exceptional and have finished right on the top, and then choose to come here, I find then they may not be able to step down from that place that they have held for some amount of time. Because I feel to be a coach, an effective coach, you need to also come down a few levels so that you can relate. Of course, you're lifting up the coaching, but you also need to come down. So I find too much experience leads to a little ego, and ego comes in the way of coaching. And I also find, I would have that problem that the more senior we get, the less we listen. And so coaching is more about listening than about, talking. So I would say that more coaching experience is more important to me than more business experience from that.
I would endorse that 100% without you asking me. Any day, more of coaching experience.
Ganesh won't like this, but I get very nervous when he proposes anyone who's retired as a director level in a large company. I get very nervous.
Okay.
Terrific stuff. Ganesh, question from Geeta Radhakrishnan, who says that in today's, with all this work from home and all that's been happening, there's perhaps a possibility that more people will try coaching and try and want to get a coach. But is it complicated, or do results get compromised because of all this, distancing and travel bans? How effective is coaching in a remote world?
So CFI is perhaps best positioned to answer this, because till March 16th, we were 100% face-to-face coaching. People would travel long, sometimes 2 days, to go and meet their coaches, spend a day with them and come back, and so on and so forth. We believe it has to be done that way. It has to be done that way. But COVID forced us, and I'm being candid in saying forced us to reinvent our position. We had to convert all our coaching engagements into remote. And firstly, a true tribute to our clients that they trusted us and they said, I know you guys will do a good job, so it's okay, go completely virtual. We went virtual. Over 100 coaching assignments have gone virtual in the last 10 months, over 100 coaching assignments. And it's worked. And another 20 assignments odd have started totally virtual without any face-to-face. It works. Some model tweaking and changing has to be happen, and I won't delve into the details. But I think it's important that the coach shows enormous discipline in maintaining the cadence of meetings. Sessions will become shorter but more frequent, more touch points with sponsors, being more innovative, and the beauty is you can actually connect with sponsors far more often. You can get 10-15 minutes on their calendar quickly. So we are finding a lot of advantages which we were completely blind to up until this point. And therefore, and it puts the skills of the coach to complete test. How empathetically present can you be? How well can you listen? How can you capture a discussion and share it back? How can you check in more frequently with your coachee? So I'm convert now actually.
Super, super. That's really bringing us to the end. But before we finish, I just thought we'll try and give each of you, maybe 30 seconds to try and respond and in some ways summarize your thoughts over here. So Vir, as someone who's seen coaching, what would you say has been the top benefit that you have felt of having, welcome coaching into your corporate, into your own career and into your organization?
I think the great thing about coaching is that it is a safe environment in which an experienced person has an opportunity to make a change, for themselves. And I've done it myself. I've seen some of my colleagues who have had successful engagements do that. I think each of us has come out of it, wherever it's been successful, happy that we invested that time, because it is a big investment of time. And I appreciate this process, that it is a safe environment, in which you can do this. So I think that's my big takeaway about coaching, which when you go to, when you do executive training or, other things which are more external, it's not as safe an environment. And many of us at senior levels need that environment if we want to make a big change, so that's how I see it.
Super stuff. Safe environment can help enormously, I'm sure. Suresh, there are lots of HR folks listening in on this call, and if they've been thinking of trying out coaching but are not convinced, what would you tell them? A couple of things about why they might want to try coaching.
I would first say, don't think too much, just plunge in. So many people can't be wrong, whether what you read or what we hear. So just take the initiative to be the evangelist for coaching. And the best would be, if you've not been a coach or a coachee, at least do one of these. I'd recommend being a coachee first and then a coach, because that's when you really realize the benefit of coaching as a coachee, which motivates, and that's happened not just me, but with many of my colleagues. So that would be one strong advice. Second one is somebody who influence in the organization, like Vir. I mean, Blue Star is lucky that he's anyway there as CEO. You need that promoter. It has to be one of the CXO people. That would be one more suggestion I would give. Have a very strong influencer and partner where money and budget, which are all more of excuses, become an issue. And the third one is, I would say, first select a few of your colleagues whom you know well, trust well, who are seen to be successful. Get them converted through one of these routes. And once that happens, then you have a lot more people helping you do it. You can sit back and enjoy the ride. And I really mean that.
Super stuff. Ganesh, last word. Imagine, Ganesh, that CFI gets a billboard in BKC, Bombay, in Mumbai, and you can say what you want about coaching on it. What's that one line you would put out there so that every executive who drives past it sees it and understands what coaching is? So you have a billboard. What's the line?
Realize inner potential.
Realize inner potential. Super stuff. And I can see Vir come up there and write over there a few words which says, in a safe environment. And Suresh will then say, just do it and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been so much fun.
But Prakash, I'm sorry, in the interest of your FMCG background, my line would be, coaching hai jahan, tandurusti hai wahan.
Go for it. Go for it. Well done, Vir. Well done. Yeah, just the life every boy needs. Terrific.
Prakash,
thank you so much.
Go.
Yeah. Over to you, Ganesh. Tell me.
It's been fantastic having you moderate this. Really outstanding job. Truly thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much
for the opportunity, but you guys made it so much fun. Thank you so much. I hope all of you listening in enjoyed listening in, found those answers interesting, and perhaps learned just a little bit more about how you can open that box, discover the goodies that coaching has to offer, and hopefully sample it. I just want to refer back to a comment from Dwarkanath. And since we talked about it, ego can be a problem in the world. And if a coach has an ego, it can be a problem. And he says sachets work because hair can be cleaned easily, but egos take a long time. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Suresh and Vaishnavi and all for putting this together and making this happen. Suresh, are you there?